Thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. There we go. And I am studying sociology. I'm actually seeking a degree in sociology here in Boston. And part of my studies has led me to examine this phenomenon called the control factor. I also have been reading about it in a book called Jihadist Psychopath: How He is Charming, Seducing, and Devouring Us by Jamie Glassoff. Very, very good book. Here, I'll hold it up for the camera. And Jamie's been a guest on my program before. I'm not here to endorse the book or necessarily agree with some of his premise with regard to his focus on radical Islam, but the principle of the controlling factor is very interesting to me. It also was written about by, the name came from a book, let me just see here, The Control Factor by Bill Siegel. He's an author and a lawyer. And basically the idea is that the control factor is the willingness of individuals to suspend reality in the face of something that is so unpleasant and so depressing to think about that we just don't want to go there. We assume everything's fine. And Jamie Glassoff and I think Bill Siegel talk about this in terms of America's inability or refusal to deal with the phenomena of radical Islam and how the jihadists are trying to kill us and conquer us. But I would open the lens and say that this also applies historically to communism, to international socialism, to Nazism. And I would also bring it down to a microcosm as a an interventionist sociological view, which would be that it applies to individuals and families who depend on this control factor. They are manipulative people. They are manipulative ideologies which seek to dominate us and control us, and which depend upon this factor because they are depending on the better part of our nature and our unwillingness to focus on and deal with a situation that is threatening and an ideology that's evil. I suppose in the broad sense, we could say this is how Satanism works. This is how Satan works. It's evil. It's something that is appealing to the darkest sides of all of us and trying to seduce us. And so we don't want to believe in it. We suspend belief. This goes also to a lot of the scorn that people have for selective conspiracy theories. Nobody wants to think that, some evil, sinister theory, conspiracy resulted, for example, in the destruction of the Twin Towers on 9/11. So we go with a simple understanding. We try to simplify it. The government is happy to work, to comply with that, to bring that into effect, because if we knew the entire truth and if we opened the lens up and took a look at the whole story, not that I'm claiming a conspiracy here, but if we did that, we might learn things that are so unpleasant and so depressing and so evil that, it might actually cause some real changes in society for the better, or it may upset people to such a high degree that they might just drop out. So we're willing to accept a pared down, simplified view of the situation. We're in a certain level of denial, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that's what's meant by the control factor. Now, I'm going to read a little of this. It's really, really good stuff. And again, this is Jamie Glassoff's book. He says here, author Bill Siegel labels this dynamic in the context of our terror war as the control factor, the title of his book. He demonstrates that this factor is the element in human psychology that induces them to deceive themselves in certain dangerous situations, and that it is precisely this element that is today causing the West to embrace jihad denial and, by logical extension, its own surrender. In other words, when we see acts of terror, we no, that's not real Islam. Oh, no, this is not really happening. What about this person that was not Islamic. In other words, we'll make excuses for it because we don't want to really confront the actual threat. And again, I'm not here singling out radical Islam. I mean, I think this is how communism's always worked. This is how individuals work in our lives. People who are, sucking out our energy, people who are psychopaths, but yet they're so charming and they're so manipulative that they get us to enable them. And oh no, they couldn't really mean these things. This is how criminals work. It's called a con game. Anyways, to move on. Siegel documents how our culture, media, and political elites are voluntarily fooling themselves into believing that they are somehow part of the script in terms of how Islam views us, when, in fact, they are not part of the script at all. But because they cannot tolerate the notion that the situation is out of their control, they convince themselves that they are in control. In other words, you don't want to, when you hear about things that are going on that are horrendous in war and, we don't want to think of them, because it is so big and it's so overwhelming. So we try to either deny it or we try to compartmentalize it in a way that we can cope with it, I guess you might say. Although I actually believe we can cope with the truth. We don't need to be, we need to wake up to this tendency that we all have. Okay, moving on here in Jamie Glazov's book. The phenomenon is related to Stockholm Syndrome. Here, this is where he gets into it. The psychological condition in which captives feel and express empathy and sympathy toward their captors and abusers, often to the point of defending and identifying with them. Now, we've all experienced that to a certain extent. There's something really miserable that happens in the news, and we'll be like, oh, no, it couldn't be. We make excuses rather than maybe there is an excuse, but we don't take a hard, unvarnished look at it. This is why we criticize people for engaging in a question about conspiracy, whether there are conspiracies involved, whether there's a grand conspiracy, because, it's just too unpleasant to think about. We don't want to place that kind of an onus on our fellow man. We're willing to suspend credulity in order to look at people in a certain way and not view situations as they actually may be. Okay. The phenomena, the people who embrace the control factor, and this is according to Jamie Glazov, who is very, very good. He's a brilliant thinker, are primarily the left, and they come in two basic varieties. The first variety, which we'll label type 1, are the leftists who willfully embrace jihad denial in this case, because they are completely aware of what their membership in the unholy alliance entails. Now, his definition of the unholy alliance is the Islamists and their enablers around the world, people who, they want to punish those who try to point the problem out rather than take a look at the actual problem. And by the way, he points out, I think maybe I might be interjecting here, but in a way, the people, they'll call you an Islamophobe if you try to identify jihad, when in fact they're the ones who are anti-Muslim, because they are not really objectively examining this terrible system that oppresses women in particular, but people across the board. The system that throws homosexuals off of top of a roof. I saw something the other day on 60 Minutes about the problem of gay people in Arab countries, mostly in Islamic countries, who fear for their life and who have to flee those countries. They're not talking about the fact that Islam as a doctrine is the problem. Instead, they avoid that. It's like a denial. Instead, there's something anti-gay. Fine, anti-gay, okay, I get that. But there's a doctrinal problem here, with an organization that enforces Sharia law, which calls for that, which permits it, which allows it, which treats women like they're second-class citizens. Women have to be wrapped in these, head to foot. You can't even see them, and they can be, murdered if they go out in public with a man other than their husband, And even then, I mean, if they even show like their wrist, I don't know. There's honor killings, there's child brides, there's sexual mutilation in the form of female circumcision. There's practices that we make either they make excuses for them, or they deny that they're happening, or they actually, in a very racist manner, say, well, those are third world countries. That's their custom, as if they're somehow not capable of treating people properly, which they are. So who is really anti-Muslim? I think that the people who are in denial and who are leaving millions of women in particular into these repressive societies where they have no rights, where they're treated extremely poorly, they're the ones who are anti-Muslim, because these people are Muslims and they are subjected to these systems. Anyway, getting back here. They seek to utilize jihad denial to aid and abet Islamic supremacists' agenda to destroy the West, since it serves their own desire to destroy their host society and to build their vision of a classless utopia on its ashes. Now, this is an important point. Again, this is the type A person. And I subscribe this to people who are communists, people who are radical socialists, and to individuals that they've embraced this kind of utopian faith. They believe that they can transform man. They have this messianic idea, what E. Michael Jones subscribes to Jews wrongfully, but which is a messianic movement, that somehow a man-made Messiah is going to come along and reshape man. And by doing so, they have to destroy freedom. They have to destroy what America's about, which is the individual under God having natural rights. They want to destroy that. So they make an alliance with the radical jihadists who are trying to do the same thing. This was why people on the far left never spoke up about millions and tens of millions of people being murdered by communist regimes. Or during the 1940s, they didn't speak up too much about Hitler while he was in alliance with Stalin, because after all, that was on the right side, and it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit their very subjective understanding of what reality is, what existence is. So they go into either a denial, or in some more witting cases, they condone it. They say, well, this is the blood that needs to be shed for creating the new man, the new revolution. Maybe we should try harder next time. We'll make it a purer fight. We'll kill more of the regressive elements to make it a more pure species until eventually we reach utopia, which is the international one world ant colony. Anyway, but most people are not that witting. Getting back here, type 2, this is the second type, are the leftists who are relatively uncertain about the malice and destruction behind the unholy alliance agenda, but they support it and allow the control factor to shape their thoughts and behavior because they cannot accept certain basic truths about the human condition and the threat that Islam poses. Again, I could interject that with communism or other ideologies. Too much knowledge about Islam will shatter the fairy tale world that they need to believe in and will undermine their faith in the utopia that they think they and or their leaders are building. Yeah, they want to worship these great and glorious leaders, these messiahs. They worship Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, or I haven't seen any messiahs come up lately on the Democratic side. I can't imagine them, Joe Biden, becoming a left-wing messiah, but we'll see. I'm sure that we'll see this coming up in the next several months. But they need to worship this figure because they're looking for this messianic redemption on earth. Unlike the rest of us who are not interested in this, we want to live life as best we can and try to promote individual freedom and the right to be different and to differ on many, many issues, which is normal. But this hypnotic control factor, just to wrap things up here. Let me just reject that. This control factor is a suspension of reality. It is a suspension of conventional moral and ethical understandings in the name of either denial or being a part of something. It's, to my way of thinking, most people who do this are just sheep. They want to be, they crave the social acceptance and the easy sense of righteousness, the alleviation of some alleged guilt, the feeling like they're doing something good and when they don't have to do anything at all. It's the easy way to go. So you don't look at jihad. You don't look at communism. You don't look at the self-righteous person in your life who is a psychopath, but who is so charming and so eloquent that you enable that person for the rest of their life. In some cases, you never wake up, and you make yourself miserable. You hurt yourself ultimately. You become a basket case over it. Frankly, I'm speaking about people that I know, and that really the antidote to this poison is to wake up. To debug ourselves from false ideas, to understand that, the reason we have a freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of press is because that's the best means of engaging in conversation that we may disagree and that may be disagreeable, but that has the opportunity of exposing and identifying truths. And if you expose and identify truths and hold them up to the light, then there's a chance for individual reform and righting the ship of a society as well, in the broad sense and within the context of freedom and what is humanly possible, not some messianic idea. Anyway, so those are my thoughts today on the control factor. Later this week, I'm having a very interesting sociologist come on. I'm going to be doing a whole series with sociologists over the next several months, who is talking about the small coterie of people who he argues control the world. The book is called Giants. It's available at Amazon. So I'm in the process of reading that. I'll be getting more into that in a day or two. I believe that will be on Thursday. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. Please subscribe to the station. I would really appreciate that. And have a great afternoon. Charles Moscowitz. Thanks a lot.